Welcome back to the second hour of Citizen Extra live on Citizen TV. Thank you so much to everyone SMSing us about Presidential Petition 101. I must bring that panel on next week again to talk about some of the issues around this, with all eyes on the Supreme Court and of course the Presidential Petition, the deadline for filing being today. A lot happening there. But now let's switch gears. As I mentioned earlier, right now Google the word Kenya, or specifically Kenyan election, and you'll be curious to see how many headlines will pop up from local and international media outlets in regards to last week's election. What does the world really think about East Africa's top democracy? Of course, we take time now to take a look at some of those headlines. And before we do, let me introduce my panel in studio who will help us to take a look at those headlines. I'm joined by Nakia White, a crisis manager. Welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you.
We also have Michael Agwanda, a political analyst. Thank you so much for coming once again on the program.
Thank you.
And John Gashie, a foreign relations expert, helping us to shed light on how the world views Kenya and what Kenya should do to have, of course, what Kenya should celebrate in terms of positive reviews we're getting, but what we need to work on and fix in terms of where there may be potentially negative reviews. Well, let's take a look now at what some of the international media are saying about Kenya. Different headlines, varied issues. Let's take a look at some of them now, popping up on your screen. The first one there from the New Yorker: Kenyan democracy missed opportunity. Al Jazeera saying how Kenya became the latest victim of fake news. This should be, I think, Bloomberg. Economic storm clouds hang over Kenyatta's second term. Daily Maverick: will Kenya always be the country of the future? Let's take that once again. New Yorker: Kenyan democracy missed opportunity. Al Jazeera: how Kenya became the latest victim of fake news. Bloomberg: economic storm cloud hangs over Kenya leader's second term. And Daily Maverick: will Kenya always be the country of the future? Nakia, let me start with you. Will Kenya always be the country of the future, is what some are asking. Are we the country of the future, or are we the country of the present?
Well, I think that there's a great opportunity for Kenya to be the country of the future. One of the most important things that Kenya has to do is control corruption. And so I think while Kenya has been rated as one of the wealthiest countries, in Kenya has also been rated as one of the most corrupt in the world. So I think when you have these two kind of competing subjects happening, it really is hard to say that Kenya will be the country of the future, especially if corruption is not handled, and corruption on all levels and not just in a visceral manner.
For the last 2 weeks, corruption has been put on the side as we talk about our elections. That article also referred to an ideal that one day Kenya will hold a nearly flawless election, but it's like for now it wasn't there. Your take on that? Have we done well, and maybe the international media is just looking for headlines, or how much more work do you think needs to be done? When do you think Kenyans will have an election where international media will come to Kenya and leave within 2 days? Well, there wasn't much to talk about.
Here's what I think is the more important question to ask. When will Kenyans think that Kenya will have a fair, free, and credible and free election? I think for me that's the most important question, because when Kenyans start to believe that their government is working and their electoral system is working, then that feeds back into the international community. Or if the international media says that, hey, this is a corrupt country, they're not doing well, Kenyans will push back on that. But as long as Kenyans still have a bit of apathy around the electoral system and the electoral process, that's still going to be a thought or a feeling that vibrates out, right? So that's my thought on that.
So Kenyans first. Forget about
I think Kenyans first.
Let me bring John into this discussion as well. John, for you, any of those headlines stand out for you for any reason? Either stand out in a positive manner or a negative manner, and why?
Thank you. For me, perhaps it's rather the very judgmental framing of those headlines.
Okay.
And I think they're really coming from perhaps a preconceived idea, and I think also perhaps misconception of what is happening in Kenya, really. And I'm finding this missed opportunity.
In fact, I was going to ask you about that.
I'm a little intrigued, because it's so loaded in the sense that did the U.S. missed opportunity with Trump? Did Britain lose the opportunity with Theresa May?
How would you have, I don't know whether you have a background, how would you have written that headline while staying true to the facts?
Perhaps the bigger issue is that what opportunity was missed? Really?
Okay. Okay.
You see, what I'm saying is, did the U.S. miss an opportunity with Trump?
Depending on which side of the
It
divide.
depends on who you ask.
Precisely.
Exactly.
Precisely.
Yes,
Yeah, and she's from the U.S.
I am from the US.
Okay, and I think there are differences about perception. And let's talk about choices.
Okay.
And let's talk about the opportunity to make a determination. Right?
You're taking over the show.
Precisely. Precisely. Because I am a little concerned when I get people saying, missed opportunity. And I'm saying about, hey, wait a minute. We had an election, my friend. We made a determination. There are issues that we need to resolve. But stop sitting on an armchair, what I call armchair passing judgment.
Let me hold you there.
Yes.
You raised pertinent questions. Let me bring Michael into this now. Missed opportunity? Is that an accurate headline? It seems to be the one we're focusing on now. Before we talk about the economic storm that Bloomberg was also referencing.
Let me start by saying this, that we had an election and it was a seamless election, never been experienced in this country.
Okay.
There were a number of observers, in fact, more than 500 observers came to Kenya. I can't imagine of any observation group, political observation group out there that did not send a representative.
Actually, more like 5,000.
5,000 to be precise. Over 5,000 observers came over here. And so Kenya was already in the limelight. We are in the limelight not just because of some of the things they are calling missed opportunities, but we are in the limelight because this country has topped the world in so many other things. When it comes to tourist destination, Kenya is one of the best tourist destinations in the world. When it comes to athletics, Kenya is one of the countries that is celebrated all over the world. When it comes to human capital, and that is just educated, we are exporting a lot of professors and a lot of engineers all over the world. As such, you'll realize that Kenya is known, but we've also not done very well when it comes to electioneering period. Men and women that have come from all over the world, they are working in this country when after every 4.5 years plan to leave, be they Asians, be they Americans, be they the British, be they European citizens, they plan to leave for something called fallow, but they, at the back of their mind, they're also thinking, well, we could be having issues in this election. Let me take off before that time.
And come back later, when things cool down.
Maybe what we need to do as a country is look at ourselves, and I like what Nakia was saying, look at ourselves and say, when will we be able to have trust on our electioneering system to an extent where we'll believe and we'll have faith and trust that this election will be done, and it will be done well, and we have faith in these people. Remember, it is only in this country where every 5 years we have new people, new arbiters in our election, and they don't exit ceremoniously. They actually exit unceremoniously. In fact, they are hounded out of the office with a lot of hue and cry, and sometimes with even blood on the street. As such, you will expect the world to know so much about this country. This is the only country where the president, the immediate president of the United States of America, has roots on. And so you can imagine how many people are researching about Kenya because of President Obama. And when President Obama even went for his second term and decided to visit Kenya, the world was watching Kenya. Now the question is, and everybody is asking, now if everybody is talking about Kenya, what is their democratic process of electioneering?
Okay.
Is it free and fair? As we've known them.
I thought you were going to answer that question for me.
And that's what I want to say. That's what you want to say. But let me tell you, the problem we've had, it's never been easy for Kenya. We've had accusation and counter-accusation in all our electioneering process. In fact, the only time we ever had anything near to a perfect election was 2002, during the transition of Moi to Kibaki.
Let me cut you there and bring Nakia into this. Some have called Kenya a leading light in democracy. Some say no. where would you place us? Of course, this might be a bit of opinion, but
Yeah.
and when you compare us with other African democracies,
I think Kenya is a negotiated democracy. I think Kenya is a negotiated democracy. It is a democracy that works when it is beneficial to the political class.
Okay.
And it is not a democracy when it does not benefit the political class. And so there's a negotiation. It's not, while Kenya has been noted as one of the shining lights or the bright lights of Africa's economy or a budding economy in Africa's political class or system, it still is a very much young democracy, a growing democracy, and I think, in my opinion, a negotiated democracy, as we've seen, the Electoral Commission with the onslaught of court cases that they had up until almost Christmas last year, and even a couple of weeks until the election. So when you are trying to push an independent electoral commission to kind of move in a way that you think might fit it best, and interrupting its system, it's still you're negotiating with democracy. You're not saying let this independent body be independent and work in solitude and a silo. So for me, I think it is a negotiated democracy. I think it's a growing democracy and has the potential to really be the beaming light of Africa.
Okay.
But again, my biggest kind of issue that has to be worked on is the level of corruption in the country that affects every last single aspect of Kenya life.
Okay. John, I know you'd wanted to respond to something Michael Agwanda was talking about, and also I'll ask you about Kenya as a leading light of democracy in Africa, your take on that.
Yeah, thank you very much. My own perhaps take is this. I think democracy is just a journey. It's a beginning.
Okay.
And for this country, we have a historical perspective to bring into this. And perhaps, as my colleague here has observed, perhaps the best time that we did have a semblance, for lack of a better term, that there was a regime change, 2002. And perhaps there was a historical context in which this had to take place. It is in between 2002 and now that within the political class there is contestation as to who then are the champions of democracy, as to who then are the owners of the second liberation, as to who has the moral high ground. And indeed, we are in that process. There's a lot of competition. Unfortunately, as it were, neither of those two groups really are fairly democratic themselves.
They say they are.
But and you see, and the interesting perspective here is that either of those two groups are fairly good at latching at the other and also seeking external support, and they supposedly take a high moral ground.
For purposes of context, you're talking about Jubilee and NASA?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I'm talking about the leading lights within that entire system.
Okay, okay.
And for those that are aware of who are the leading lights of those systems, indeed the 202, they are all right across the political divide.
Yes.
And as we see it out here, there are those, perhaps within NASA and within Jubilee, and particularly within the entire political class, the elite as it were, that we have that serious contestation. Now, has that happened? Have we gone through the process? Have we managed to kind of instill within our system processes that allow for a fair democratic exercise of choices? Now, we are, if I were to say, from 10 being the maximum, I would say we are about 5.5, 6 at most.
Okay.
Now, but having said that, I am a little concerned here that those that think that they need to take over the reins of power, and they usually, if they do fail for whatever reason, they usually latch back and say, hey, unless I am the epitome of democracy. I am getting a little frustrated about that.
Okay.
Indeed, what we are having now is that contestation. Okay.
Who is the champion of democracy?
Yes.
Like,
And then there is
I'm not understanding, actually.
what I'm saying is, the issue here is now, we are having a lot of people who are out there within the political leadership in this country, who then their clarion call is that I am the paragon of democracy, me.
So let's use an example.
Yeah,
let's talk about a county, for example,
Yes.
where an incumbent governor has lost.
Yes.
And the first thing they say is this process was not free, it was not fair, it was not credible. And so the question is, if they had won,
Yes.
would they have then said that the process was free, fair, credible, transparent? But when you lose, it's not. I'm hoping that's what you're trying to say.
And this is what I'm trying to say here. Now, within the process of instilling and protecting our democratic structures and ideals, as it were, we're still having some fairly interesting political ambitions that are being thwarted one way or the other. Now, has the processes, the IEBC for that matter, the Kenyan people on the 8th, as it were, really came out
That's right.
in their millions. The process was beautiful. And indeed, now what we are having right now,
Briefly, because I need to bring in...
good, yes, what we have right now
Yes.
is to establish whether the processes were fair and the choices were correct. And we're going to have perhaps a judicial system examining this.
That's right.
Prior to that, as it were now, we are having some judgmental guys sitting out there and saying Kenya a missed opportunity. All right? And then I'm hearing about corruption. And I am willing to concede it's a serious matter. But it's not only, shall I say, a domain of Kenya. Right? In that regard.
Very true.
And I'm not defending whatever I'm
You're
hearing.
being brief for anyone.
Yes,
No.
all I'm trying to say, I am a little, my patience is running out when I'm hearing a lot of people out there saying this and that and this and that, kind of preaching to Kenya.
Okay. Let me hold you there. We've got more headlines. I don't know whether this will help our discussion or make it even more divided. Let's take a look at what some other international media outlets are saying about Kenya. Are they saying the right thing? Do they have, you know, okay, let's see. Kenyans voted along ethnic geographic lines to re-elect Kenyatta. I'm not sure which paper that is. I'll clarify. An opinion piece here, but I think that's the Independent. Kenya, free from the court. Kenya, from the court of the people to the court of law. Okay. And Africa News says, seeking an African presidency through the courts, how feasible is this? Another one here says, Kenyatta wins big in Kenya, but US-style election skullduggery taints the results. Okay, can we take them one more time real quick? Just for the benefit of my panelists here. Okay. Let's see if we can get that one more time. If not, I hope you've each. Okay, I think we have them one more time. Let's see there. So Kenyans voted along ethnic geographic lines to re-elect Kenyatta. I'll clarify for you what media outlet that is shortly. An opinion piece here. Kenya, from the courts of the people to the courts of law. Let's take a look at the other two once more. I'm just giving my panelists a chance to note each of these headlines as we carry on with this discussion. African News, seeking an African presidency through the courts. How feasible? Question mark. And finally, Kenyatta wins big in Kenya, but US-style election skullduggery taints the results. Nakia,
I don't understand the last one, the skullduggery. What exactly is that?
I'm going to Google. I
read that twice, and I said, well, what is skullduggery? But anyway.
Is it like cloak and dagger? A lot of mystery around.
Mystery around.
I guess, around the process.
But U.S.-style election skull. Oh, I see. Okay, so I would love to talk about this one, but I do want to talk about the first one.
Okay.
The first headline, which spoke around the data to say that Kenyans basically voted
along ethnic and geographic lines.
Correct, right. So interestingly enough, Jubilee hired a company called Cambridge Analytica. And Cambridge Analytica was one of those companies that is known throughout kind of the industry as kind of formatting data, collecting data. They've worked on everything from Brexit to Jon Snow in the United States, or Snowden, John Snowden. So they are apparently one of the most premier kind of data firms in the country that they hired, along with another company, a PR company out of London or England. So, you know, some of the data that is being used is data really that Jubilee was smart enough to bank and smart enough to collect, to know where to get their vote. So when we do look at kind of how Kenyans voted, again, they did vote a lot along the geographical and the ethnic lines. But here's the bright light in all of this, or the bright light at the end of the tunnel. I think you have a younger generation that is starting to look at politics in a very different way and say, we're not going to kind of vote the same way our grandparents did or our parents did. We're going to vote very differently. And I think in 2022, you're going to see really a shifting of the voting system, or the way that people vote now. Because younger people you're going to have now two generations of young people who are going to be able to vote, and they're going to vote very differently than their parents, very differently than their grandparents. We're also going to see elections different. We saw two different elections or campaigns that happened in this country that were really phenomenal campaigns, and I think we're going to see, and it really focused on social media, focused on getting on the ground, so I think we're going to see a little bit more on that. And so the demographic of how people vote are going to change, and we're going to see the demographic of that. So that's what the skullduggery.
I was going to come back to you because I want to bring Michael in. I'm coming back to skullduggery. Michael, go ahead. I know you have a lot to respond to.
You know, a lot is going on, and when we think that Kenya can only be seen on ethnicity lines and also geographical margins, then you wonder how Jubilee will get votes in Western Province, for example. How Jubilee will get votes for example, in you know, some of them even in Luo Nyanza they got votes. How Jubilee will get votes even at the coastal area. So really, I think what is being sold out there that we're so ethnical to a point where we could not use our mind and basically vote for an individual that we think will be our best leader amongst the equal is wrong in my view, because if you look at even you know, in Western Province where Governor Lusaka was, he lost, and when he lost, how many Jubilee MPs were actually elected from the very, very area? You see that, Bungoma area, and so the question is, are we just saying that we are voting along ethnical lines and we're not making you know, very, very serious decision on who our leaders are going to be? This election was a little different. If we look at how Jubilee has gotten MPs from all over this country, and so it is not merely, it cannot be said that it is merely on ethnical line and geographical line. This election has actually redefine that definition, that accusation of us purely voting on ethical lines. I mean, I don't think in Western there's so many you know, people from Central that will enable the Western people, especially Bungoma area, to be able to elect 4 MPs, for example. I mean, 2 MPs from that area. So that's not a possibility. But again, I look at some of the things that are being said, and I look at one of the headlines, from the court of the people to the courts of justice, courts of justice. That's a very, very important thing that has happened in this country. If anything, I think the international community perhaps will not have even expected the opposition to decide to go to court, because first, the opposition said they were not going to go to court. It was not even an option. In fact, they repeated it several times that everybody knew they will not go to court. But the question was, what if they lost? And in this case, technically they've lost. Of course, the president has not been sworn in. This is going to be contested in court. But they've lost. They have not been declared the winner. And if they've not been declared the winner, technically we're saying they have lost. The question, however, that everybody were asking is, then what if you don't go to the courts of law?
What's the other option?
Now, what is the other option? Because that's what created the fear. My friend, you walk out here, if you were in Nairobi yesterday, and you were in the CBD, there are fewer people in Nairobi than you've ever seen in your entire life. I mean, it would have been worse.
If you don't like traffic.
Yes. It would have been worse if they looked at other options other than going to the court of law. And I think this country is growing in our democracy to a point where we can say, look, we have many other options, but let's first give the courts of law an opportunity to hear our grievances and see how the ruling takes.
So given a chance, you would rewrite some of those headlines.
Correct. I would.
John, let me bring you in on this.
Yes.
You wanted to jump in.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I would say the one of the people voting and going to justice, I think that for me was spot on.
Okay.
Right?
The mood of the nation.
That really is spot on. The other one of this cult, I don't know how you pronounce that. Whatever that. I think, again, that to some extent is also spot on, and that what we've had right now, there are claims and counterclaims, that the entire transmission, the electoral process, that was fairly, according to all the observers that were there, the actual voting was brilliant, as it were. Is only the transmission and the integrity of the figures and the numbers. And I think that, to a large extent, is where we are now. And I think the court deciding will be determining, is that really true? Did it really happen? Can we establish? Can we go to the bottom of it? Can we cut the chase now and say, you won or you didn't? They were cooked or they were not. What evidence do you have? And indeed, what is it that happened? But again, the one on the geographic and ethnic, to a large extent, again, also captures. There is some truth into that.
And I was going to ask Michael about
that. There is some truth into
Could you have addressed it?
But, again, when you look at the map, as it were, there's been some shifts. And we cannot, as it were, then lump up Kenya that is monolithically ethnic and geographic. Indeed, perhaps, if we were to substitute ethnic and geographic, the issues were about reform and change. The two, Nessar and Jubilee. There was reform and change. Indeed. But the way it was clothed, the way it was projected, and what have you. Is Kenya then ready for that? And I think we went to the people to decide.
Yes.
And we are going to the Court of Justice to establish what happened. Are there people perhaps shedding, as she said, shedding their ethnic, shall I say,
identities,
silos, and you see, and again, remember, this is also very, shall I say, Western view, that Africa is ethnic. Damn it, it's not ethnic. America is very racial, as it were. And I'm saying here, and you think, okay, and we have to get this. The US or Britain is very, English, so to speak. Those of us who've been to the US, the Western world, we know there are a lot of issues that are very ethnic, racial, and what have you. So to have somebody out there sitting out here telling us that it's possibly
writing these pieces while you know what's been happening in Charlottesville,
suddenly, and you see, and you're setting kind of that. Listen, it's so condescending. For me, what irritates me is when I have a lot of Western perception and views and perspective that are not based on facts. They're based on very simplistic understanding, binary perception of what Africa is all about.
Let me cut you there. We also know that what's happening today, sorry John for that, because I need to bring this in, lots of governors, those are incumbents who got a second chance, or and this is on a side note, are being inaugurated today. They are taking their oath of office, and so shortly we'll be crossing over to Kajiado County, where Stephen Leto will be giving us an update there as Joseph Olelenku goes through that particular process. We'll also hopefully cross over to Homa Bay. Governor Cyprian Awiti, the voters there give him a second chance. We'll give you those images as well. As soon as we have them, we will bring them up on your screen John breathing fire in studio is the only way I can describe this particular discussion right now. And I hear you come in now, talk about skullduggery, you read and that particular headline. But also I want to know similarities between the American election that was held last year and the Kenyan election and differences.
Listen, no question. There is still a cloud that looms over the United States, the American election, particularly as it relates to Russian interference. As kind of emails were released from the Democrats and as we saw throughout the world, that bell rung, that there was kind of some interference. And we still don't know, as Americans, how much it was influenced, if systems were influenced. We simply don't know. And I think, the question around Chris Msando dying just a week before, or being murdered, I should not say dying, being murdered a week before the elections, and Kasadi dying a month before the elections, it causes people to believe that there was something nefarious going on around the elections here. So certainly if Mr. Raiola has the proof, he should, again, as he is doing, present it in court to see if, and to determine if there is something true to that statement. But I do want to mention that the judiciary just made accusations or tried to file a court case or ruling to say that the ruling party was threatening them in their decisions to make, or threatening them in their judiciary responsibilities in terms of how they ruled. So I think if we also have to be honest about if Kenyans are taking this issue to court, but the judges are there saying, in their chamber saying, listen, we are being threatened. Our responsibility of upholding the law is being compromised because of these things. That has to be taken seriously as well. So I'm not sure what the answer is or what the redress is for anyone in this situation, but having these real conversations happening is important. Now, in terms of statistics and in terms of, the West talking to Kenyans or saying all of these headlines about Kenyans, listen, so I do believe that there are very many similarities. We have Democrats, and I say this all the time, we have Democrats and Republicans who can't seem to get it together. They just can't seem to get it. The Democrats are not strong enough to do what they need to do. The Republicans are too strong-willed to do what's right for the people. So we are constantly in the United States, and we saw it very clearly with Barack Obama. We're at a complete impasse. And now we have number 45 who is at the seat, who is reckless. Incredibly
the views of my panelists.
That is my view, and I'm very clear about that. I am very clear about that. He's reckless. We have a president that is reckless in the United States, especially when you cannot say, you mentioned Charlottesville earlier, when you cannot say that this is wrong, these are white supremacists, these are neo-Nazis, and they should not be allowed to go out and call racist names from Jews to blacks. It is wrong. And I would expect that the president of Kenya, if this were to happen, whether it was to a Lulu or a Kalajin or a Kissy, that he will come out and say the same thing, that this is wrong. We do not isolate a particular tribe or group based on their ethnic identification and murder them or kill them. I would expect for him to come out and repudiate whatever violence or whatever drastic measures are being taken against a tribe, the same way that I expect my president to do that, and he hasn't. And he's reckless. My opinion.
We're going to leave that there. Michael, come in.
Let me come in and say this. We are in a country where we are journeying through our democracy. We haven't quite got there yet. You asked a question about whether Kenya is one of the leading democracies in Africa, and I can tell you that it is true. Kenya has made many miles forward in terms of democracy, and the ability to speak freely in this country is one experience that so many politicians will tell you, man, this is just a walk in the park. There are many countries in Africa where people are still not able to discuss their their internal issues freely without going to jail. And we've seen this in the past regime. But we're in a place also where we seem to be borrowing so much from the Western world, where we think that they are almost into a perfect scenario in the electioneering system.
We are aspiring to be like them.
We are aspiring to be like them. I mean, we are watching stuff on TV and we want to be in Beverly Hills, just like what we see on TV. We want to do all those things, even with our electioneering system, and forgetting that what we have and the resources we have are still not able to take us right there. I think the problem of this country needs to be solved by the people that will identify their strengths and weaknesses. That is what we've not identified as a community. We have looked at the other side of the other aisle of the political divide and look at this other aisle of the political divide and not merge the two by agreeing that a government is not necessarily for the politician but for the people. I think where we are as a country, and when we're talking about an election that is already being contested, and it will be contested in court, perhaps from today, when we're talking about an election that, you know, last 2013 people went to court, 2017 people going to court, are we going to see the same thing in 2022? Maybe we need to stop and say, are our institutions, whether they are, you know, the fourth estate, whether it is the legislators, whether it is the executive, are they there for the politicians of the day, or they're there for the benefit of this country? Perhaps we've not reached there. It is in fact, where we need to begin as a country is by literally changing this constitution so that the winner doesn't take it all. And so both divides will benefit in a way. And then we don't get into this kind of stalemate. We are not ready to go to the ballot box. And as well spoken by my colleague here, we line up, and let me tell you, this, go ahead.
If we carry on with that, in that trend, we might be changing the constitution every 5 years.
No, but
we might be done as the country that...
That is the context.
20 years from now, how many amendments will we have made?
Let me conclude by saying this.
Okay.
Maybe that's where we need to head, because it is constantly about those people not sharing this bread equally
those
to
who are in
the
leadership
corner
at a particular
of
time.
this country. I think that's the problem we're having. If we had a scenario where whether you are in the position or not in the position, when you lose, the other party come together and you form a government that is for the people, maybe we'll get somewhere. But if the winner takes it all and then they start insulting other people and they start saying all manner of things that we've had in the last, you know, campaign period, then we will be divided. And I don't think, we are a small country with very little resources, in fact so much resources. If we cannot divide it equally, if we cannot ensure that everybody feels that they're part of this country, and if we cannot feel that, if we cannot be in a position where we feel that it doesn't matter who becomes the president, we will still be able to go on with our life, then we are cheating ourselves.
Okay, let me just perhaps
to respond.
Yeah, just perhaps to perhaps give a context. Why is the world interested in Kenya? And why that much interest in Kenya?
I can tell you.
Let me say, from where I stand.
You say, then you
say. Right? One, Kenya is an anchor country within this part of the region.
Okay.
Now when I say an anchor country, I say for you to do business, to move in from a strategic, diplomatic, economic and military, Kenya is a key player.
Okay. In
Right?
this region.
In this region. And this region is also at the frontier of perhaps what they're calling the frontier of hydrocarbons, oil, energy, and what have you. We are talking about the rich fisheries along the Indian Ocean. Right. Then we are talking about, we are at the edge of a terrorist arc. Right. Then we have to, again, to put another context, that Kenya, for lack, perhaps for, as my colleague said, Kenya is the 4th or 5th largest economy in Africa. And then put it in context. It's the largest non-mineral economy in Africa. let's put down the numbers.
Yes, we're competing with those who have minerals.
Exactly.
Yes.
Now, when you look at, we have perhaps one of the most highly developed and trained human resource base. We are a continental telecommunications hub. So for almost any other, outside South Africa, outside Egypt, outside Morocco,
Nigeria.
outside Nigeria, you cannot
to Kenya.
deal with Africa without Kenya. Do you understand?
Yes.
And indeed, so why is the world interested? Is that this country, as you said, a small country, in that regard, devoid of mineral resources, but with a huge potential now
Of minerals.
of mineral resources.
yes.
And in spite, we've proved our case. Can we be a driving country? Yes, we ought to be, and we must be. And I say this, we ought to be and we must be. We have no choice.
Okay.
So why is the interest? If we get it wrong,
We lose it big.
we lose big. And not only,
So it's a high stake.
it's a high stake game, but then the final, what are the commercial, strategic, financial interests
in our country.
in our country?
She's
Now,
smiling.
and you see,
that's it.
so what
Part
is
of
it?
it.
So we are talking about self-interest. And what are the self-interests at play here from Western world, China, Russia, and what have you? Everybody is coming out here. If we play our game right, if we put our house in order, if we develop our leadership structures and change over, Kenya is a place to be.
A lot
And
of
then
it.
to add on top of
Lot
that,
of it.
and
Lot
add-
of it.
and then to add on top of that, the climate.
Very good.
Fair weather all year.
Fair
round.
weather. And then, would they want to come here?
Okay.
Really, a lot of them would like to come here.
Okay.
So can I interject for a quick second?
You can interject. I want to give each of you a minute. You want, believe it or not.
No.
Almost done. I know. So I'm warning you. 1 minute. Parting. I haven't even delved deep into this, but it's a challenge of live TV, a minute each.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in terms of democracy, Kenya is seen. You talked about the economic piece, but let's talk about the democracy and governance piece. Kenya is seen as really kind of a full democracy in many of the Western world spaces, right? Kenya is seen as a full democracy and a working democracy. If this fails, if election fails, if electoral participation fails, if competition fails under the democratic system here, then democracy fails in Africa, because again, Kenya is the shining light of what democracy is supposed to be: fair, credible, and free elections, the right to compete, the right to speak and oppose is all part of democracy, as is an executive checks on power, which there is, civilian control of military, civil rights and due process, and independent media and active society. Now, what we're seeing is kind of a narrowing down, especially on media, of media being able to speak out and really report on the right thing. So again, I always say a negotiated democracy because that's what I believe it is. But one of the biggest reasons is, aside from the economic part, especially for China, one of the biggest reasons that the West, and that's the East, one of the biggest reasons that the West is looking at Kenya is because Kenya is really the sigil for what democracy is in Africa. And if this fails, then they can't point to Kenya as a golden example of what democracy is, how democracy works. Listen, they said nothing about Kagame and Rwanda, right? He's there, the Constitution just passed a third term for 7 years, right? So he can go on again. But there's no big squam about that, right? But it's not an example of democracy, but it's something that's working. So the West is not going to say anything about that because they don't have a war. There's nothing going on there. His opposition is in jail. There's nothing really being said about that. So Kenya really is kind of the last hope. We see Zuma in South Africa. There's tons and tons of corruption that's around. I'm sure that they're upset that their last president is gone from South Africa. We look at Zambia. We look at so many other countries throughout Nigeria, where they struggled through their democracy, where they have an absentee president right now. So where they're also dealing with their own economic issues, where their GDP is literally 0 to none. So when you look at Kenya, of course the strategic part, the geographical part of Kenya, the economic part of Kenya, but more importantly, how democracy works here, and pointing to Kenya as the golden example of democracy throughout. If democracy doesn't work here, then the West cannot do business with Kenya, period. Because you don't have the same system, and you can't have this conversation back and forth about how things work, right?
Okay.
So that's it.
That's it. Michael, go ahead.
A lot of people are saying that the President Uhuru, President-elect, was showered with a lot of letters of congratulatory messages from all over the world, and some are questioning United States and United Kingdom, some are questioning Germany and many other countries, in fact the European Union, that sent their observers here to the tune of over 5,000 people who came here. And so the question has been, did the observers just come to see people voting, lining up and voting, and that's it, or to a point where basically the president is declared, and so looking at that process up to that point. I think election is not just about people lining up to go vote. In fact, if anything, Kenyans know how to vote, and they went out there and voted very, very well and very peacefully. In fact, I have to commend IEBC for one thing they did this time round. They made sure that every polling station was so short that it was not as long as what we've seen in the past, by limiting a polling station to just 700 people only. That made it easier for people to go, and within a very short time they were out. But what the observers needed to do is not just to observe people vote, but also to be in the process of ensuring that tallying was done properly and the right person was announced.
And transmission of results.
And transmission of the results as well. But now the very people that actually gave this a clean bill of health came up. I saw the United States ambassador to Kenya the other day just coming out and saying, hey, don't clamp on and don't clamp on Kenya National Human Rights Commission, because there is no society that can really attain the democratization state without having a civil society, and for that reason
the European Union has also asked IBC to finish up with the forms 34.
Everything
was okay initially.
Correct. Yeah, they've said everything is okay, and now they're coming up and saying, oh, but we need to see this, and we need to see it done well. And they're talking from the absentee point of view, because observers have already gone back, and so they are hoping that IBC will be able to do what they're supposed to do without them observing what they're doing. Yet IBC is already being questioned as to whether they did this process well. I think maybe in future we don't need these observers in this country. This is what I'm saying. Maybe we don't need them, because the reason why I'm saying is they're quick to give their verdict without necessarily following through the process to a point where they can unequivocally say that this process was democratically done. But that's not to say that this country cannot do it well. We can do it well. The problem is when you see an officer of IBC being killed just few days, literally few days to the election date, it makes it suspicious.
I have to cut you there. I really have no time, but great comments that you brought up there. John, let me allow you to
yes,
in under a minute.
Yes, I would just say that perhaps what we are witnessing right now, for me, is they're very nice signs and signals.
Okay. Of what?
That all is not lost, and that Kenya will be able, in the immediate short term, to overcome this. Would we be able to have perhaps a structured governance structure that allows or is inclusive? Because the issue here is exclusion. The issue here is a fear of marginalization. The issue here is of what I would call perhaps affirmative action, so to speak. And I'm saying we can and we ought to be able to improve our democratic environment. And we are heading out there. And would we perhaps in this regard say we are losing out on democratic exercise? Certainly not.
Okay.
We are on the right track. And I think it behoves the political class, the political elite, to figure out a way to accommodate and a way to bring in all of us together. We belong to this country, and we do not need outsiders to tell us how to do it. However, we need their support. We need their views.
But candidates ask for election observers to be here. So in one instance, it's saying we don't need you here, but if you're here, you need to follow it through. Even though they kicked out ISIS for ISIS saying for accusing ISIS of being too involved in the political process, but then at the same token, you're saying that we don't. It's a very, very difficult and conversation to have.
Okay.
Because on one end you want the West End, on the other end you don't want the West End. So either you do or you don't.
We know what we're going to do. We are going to take this conversation offline, because I can clearly see that we're opening a Pandora's box that will not have a swift resolution. That's how we wrap up this part of the broadcast. Lakia White, Crisis Manager, thank you so much for taking time to be here with us, shedding light on what's happening in America and potential hypocrisy of Western democracies.
Absolutely.
Michael Agwanda, lots of unique insights, political analyst. Thank you so much. John Gashie, foreign relations expert, painted an amazing picture of why the world is looking at Kenya and what sort of stakes are playing in Kenya as well. Thank you for finding time to be here with us today on the program. We take a quick break. When we come back, we ask you, do you know the role of your MCA? What do you think about their performance for the last 4.5 years? And what have they learned? And what can they do better over the next 5 years as they keep governors accountable? We'll be talking to some of them immediately after this on Citizen Extra. But for now, we take a short break. You're watching Citizen Extra on Citizen TV.
Thank you.